The problem we run into here is sometimes these things are not written in the proper format. So if they're not written in the standard format where we have the h and the k, which is our center, and the r squared, which gives us our radius, we have to put it in that format. So if the equation's not in that standard form, we're going to put it in that standard form, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to complete the square twice. All right. Essentially, we're going to complete the square with the x squareds and the x's, and we're going to complete the square with the y squareds and the y's. And after we've done all that, then we'll have this thing in our standard form and be able to identify the center and the radius. All right. And we've done this with parabolas. This was quite a while ago, but in order to put a parabola in vertex form, we can complete the square as one of the methods, and that's what we're going to do here. All right. So, for example, the first thing we're going to do is, with completing the square, we always created space by moving the constant terms. So like here, I've got this minus 3, I'm going to add that 3 to the other side. And this plus 1 that's right here, I'm going to subtract that to the other side, okay? I'm going to rearrange some things, I'm creating space. So I've got x squared plus 4x with a little space, plus y squared minus 6y with a little space, equals, over here I add these all up and it gives me a 4, okay? So now from here I complete the square. Remember, completing the square, we're finding the value, we're finding the constant term that gives us a perfect square trinomial. And to do that, we do b divided by 2 and square it. So here when I take this 4 divided by 2 and square it, 4 divided by 2 is 2, 2 squared is a 4, so I do a plus 4. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do the other side. So I added 4 to one side of my equation, I've got to add 4 to the other side of the equation. Now I do the same thing with y. B divided by 2 and square it. Negative 6 divided by 2 is a negative 3. Negative 3 squared is a positive 9. So I'm going to do a plus 9 here. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. All right. So I have to add that to each side of the equation. Now I can factor each of these perfect square trinomials. This first one with the x squared plus 4x plus 4, that factors into an x plus 2 squared. Plus here, this one factors into a y minus 3 squared. And over here I just have to simply add all these together. It gives me a 17. See, so now I can identify the center and the radius, the center being negative 2, 3, and the radius being the square root of that 17. Okay, so we put this in standard form first so that we'll be able to get our center and our radius. If I do the same thing with the next one, the next one is a little bit tricky just because these things are kind of all over the place and not organized nicely. So in our first step, I still want to create space by moving the constant terms, or in this case constant term, there's only one of them, so I add the 5. And then right away, I'm going to go ahead and reorganize this thing. I'm going to put all my x's together and all my y's together. So it's x squared minus 2x with a little bit of space. And then the y squared plus 8y with a little bit of space. Okay, so I'm creating space, I'm reorganizing this thing, so I'm set to complete the square. All right, over here I add these together, that gives me a 13. And now I do b divided by 2 and square it, here it gives me a 1. B divided by 2 and square it, here it gives me a 16. Just remember, whatever I do to one side, I have to do the other side. I added 1 to the first side, I got to add 1 to the other side. I added 16 to the first side, I have to add 16 to the other side. All right. And now from here, I just start to factor this thing, and I combine some like terms on the other end. So over here, this guy factors into an x minus 1 squared. This one factors into a y plus 4 squared. And over here, I simply add these guys together, and it looks like it gives me a 30. So now I would be able to identify the center and the radius from this. The center is 1, negative 4. The radius is the square root of 30. And when we're ready to graph this thing, we'll just plug that into our calculator. We'll get a decimal approximation so we can count in each direction. All right? So let's tie all this together. Here's one that's not in the proper format. I'm going to put it in the proper format. Then we're going to graph this thing. So the first thing I do is create space. I start moving these constant terms. So here I add the 1 to each side. I got to get rid of this 3, so I subtract the 3 from each side. Now let's reorganize some things, put all my x's together. So x squared plus 6x with a little space. The y squared will be paired with the minus 2y with a little bit of space. And then over here, I'd simply add these together. Looks like it gives me a 15. And now I complete the square. B divided by 2 and square it. Here it gives me a 9. b divided by 2 and square it. Here it gives me a 1. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do the other side, so I need to add the plus 9 and the plus 1 to this side as well. Okay, got to keep this thing balanced. And now I just do some factoring. This factors into an x plus 3 squared. This one factors into a y minus 1 squared. And then over here, I'm simply adding these guys up. It gives me a 25. All right. So now identifying the center and the radius because I want to graph this thing. The center this time is negative 3, 1. Again, I'm taking the opposite of those guys because it's x minus h and y minus k. And then over here, this is r squared. So if r squared equals 25, I simply take the square root of each side in order to find my r value. And I find out that r equals a 5 this time. Okay? So now for graphing this thing, once again, I plot this. So negative 3, 1. Negative 3, 1 is right here. The radius is 5, so I count 5 in every direction that I can. And I just put a little mark. This one's a little bit off the graph, but that's okay. Okay, and then once I have those are the directions I can count vertically and horizontally. I can't count diagonally. So now I just do my best to draw the best circle that I can come up with here. So I try to make it look like a circle. That's my goal. I want it to be circular. I've got some stray marks happening, kind of getting in the way. Wow, that is a pretty pathetic circle, but I'm going to go ahead and live with it because I did my best. What I will not accept is just doing this, okay? That's no good, all right? And these are pretty easy to get a fairly nice-looking circle when you do them on paper. So just do your best, try to make it look like a circle, and that's it.